Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories, where we play tales to take you away from today. On the show today, we have orbs, maybe some ghosts, and an audio question.
Ron, I think that needs some explanation.
All in good time, British guy. All in good time. We have an orb story from St. Paul, and Sylvia Shults joins us for another round of Ghost Stories with Sylvia. This time she calls her stories Psych-Out.
What does that mean?
We'll find that out together.
You do know what happens next.
Yep, a 5-minute mystery.
Another 5-minute mystery.
This 5-minute mystery is being brought to you by backseat drivers. Have you got yours? Studies show that nothing ruins a drive in the country like the dreaded backseat driver. So pick up yours today.
Lieutenant Evans, Homicide Bureau.
Lieutenant, this is Dr. Norton at the city hospital.
Oh, yes, Doctor. What can I do for you?
I'm afraid I have some business for you, Lieutenant. I have a corpse down here that may be of interest to you.
I'm only interested in a certain type, Doctor. Unless this is a case
This is directly in your line, Lieutenant Evans. It's murder.
Where's your late patient, Doctor?
In here, Lieutenant Evans.
The identification on the fellow?
No, his pockets were empty. Well, there's your man, or what's left of him.
Pretty well carved up, isn't he?
Yes. Death was caused by a knife into the heart. All the other wounds were merely an anticlimax. Speaking medically, of course.
Which one of your ambulance men picked him up?
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have told you before this. But he was brought in here by a motorist who picked him up at the side of the road.
Did you get the fellow's name and address?
I did better than that, Lieutenant. I asked him to wait until you got here.
Good. I'll see him right away. Where is he?
In my office. Down this way.
I have a hunch he'll prove interesting. A man who'll give a ride to a corpse. Tell me, Mr. Scott, what time was it when you picked up the body?
I should say it was about 11 o'clock in the evening, Lieutenant. I drove directly to the hospital after that.
That was a pretty isolated road you picked to go riding on, Mr. Scott.
It's an old habit of mine to avoid the holiday weekend traffic, Lieutenant. I always use the back roads.
Was the body still bleeding when you found it?
I suppose so, Doctor. He was dead, but I put him in the back seat and rushed here as quickly as I could.
How long was that ride, Mr. Scott?
About a half hour, Lieutenant.
I estimated the death to have occurred about 9 o'clock this evening.
That was an hour before Mr. Scott discovered the body. Well, that's about all the information I'll need right now, Mr. Scott. You'll be asked to come to the coroner's inquest, of course.
I don't mind that, Lieutenant, but my time is rather valuable. I hope to be compensated for it.
I'm sorry, but I don't handle that angle for the city.
Is there any sort of claim I filed to get the back seat in my car fixed?
What happened to it?
The covers are all blood-soaked.
I told you I don't take care of that sort of stuff.
I thought murderers were your business, Lieutenant.
They are, but you don't mean...
I do, Lieutenant. If you pardon the doctor's intrusion, I'll have to diagnose Mr. Scott as suffering from a malignant case of murder.
What clue did Dr. Morton discover that led to his analysis of the crime? In just a moment we'll know, but first...
Okay, so are we confused again? Do we even have a murder case? Is our backseat rider a murder victim or a murderer? It's like my dad used to say, backseat drivers are like backseat killers. They both talk themselves to death. This 5-minute mystery is being brought to you by backseat drivers everywhere.
And now, back to our story.
That's a bad guess, Dr. Norton.
Only on your part, Scott. In thinking you could get away with it. You tipped your hand when you tried to get compensation for being courteous enough to take your victim to a hospital. I stated that he'd been dead for 1.5 hours when you brought him here. You claimed to have found the body an hour after its death. Assuming that to be true, the back seat of your car never would have been soaked with blood. The only circumstances that could have made that possible were for you to have killed him in that back seat, where he bled to death.
Backseat drivers and backseat killers. They're all alike. They just talk themselves to death.
Okay, that has to be one of the strangest cases yet, and I have to go on record and say I do not understand the reference to backseat drivers at all. So, I'm going to change our sponsor to Dead Men Tell No Tales. Works for me.
What's that you say?
I want to thank everyone that chimed in on whether the blog site needed a facelift. Overwhelmingly and unanimously, everyone voted to leave the site alone. So, I'm not changing a thing. I received this email from Zachary Bird, who writes to us from the great state of Illinois, home to our ghost hunting phenom Sylvia, who'll be joining us in a few minutes. Zach writes, I am a longtime listener to the program and just wanted to thank you for being here for me. Your show is always fun, always entertaining, and well, always there. If I had to change anything, it would be to have more stories. My question is about sound effects. I'm dabbling in sound editing and want to make my own short stories. But I can't find any sound effects that aren't copyrighted or require purchase. Can you help me with this? Zach. Well, Zach, I've been there and done that. You are correct that there are a lot of folks out there who supply sound effects, but you don't have to pay for them. There are many available on YouTube, but the problem is that you have to convert those from video to audio for use. My go-to place for sound effects? Well, it's either to create them myself or head to freesound.org. For example, a few weeks ago, do you remember that sound of Jim Harold being picked up and driven around by a car? Well, that sound was recorded by me using an external mic, my iPad, and my Subaru. Freesound.org, on the other hand, aims to create a huge collaborative database of audio snippets, samples, recordings, bleeps, whatever, and release them under Creative Commons licenses that allow for their reuse. You only have to give the creator credit if you plan to use it for commercial use. Well, Zach, I hope that helps, and thank you for the question. And now, this word from Audible. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. They have over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, computer, Kindle. Whatever you have, you can listen to Audible on it. So what am I listening to right now? Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, narrated by Stephen Fry. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Another audiobook with the Sherlock Holmes collection of stories. It is that, but this one is very different. And that difference is Stephen Fry. Fry is an English actor, screenwriter, author, playwright, journalist, comedian, film director, and all-around national treasure. He is one of those performers you just know. Here's what he had to say about performing Sherlock Holmes.
Over the years, I have indulged in my passion for Sherlock Holmes, and I hope I'm able to share some insights into these extraordinary books and this remarkable character and his great friend Watson and his great enemy Moriarty. I hope you'll get 1/100th of the joy I got from reading them in listening to them, wherever you are, walking, in your car, bicycling, working, in the gym, ironing, having a bath, goodness knows what. You can do anything when listening to a book.
Now, ever since he made his first appearance in The Study in Scarlet, Sherlock Holmes has enthralled millions upon millions of fans. Now, Audible is proud to present Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes as read by Stephen Fry. This is an exclusive for Audible, and it is the only way you can get it. Stephen has written and narrated insightful and personal introduction to each and every one of the stories, which, in my opinion, is what makes this book special, and it's without a doubt the best part. You can have this audiobook today. Here is what Audible has set up for us. Audible is offering a free audiobook and 30 days to give you the opportunity to check out their service. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. Again, that's audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories, and you can get your free copy of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes. Thank you, Audible. And now, it's time for your stories.
These are your stories, sent by you, for you.
This week we have a story from Andrea Hall, who writes to us from St. Paul, Minnesota. Hello, Ron. I have a short story and a question for you. I'll tell my story first. I know how much you love orb stories, so here we go. If you've ever been to St. Paul, you know just how cold it can get in the winters. It is both a curse and a blessing. I was out walking with my husband John in Marydale Park one cold and snowy afternoon. We were one of the few that braved the elements that day. There is a small pond at the center of the park, and it was completely iced over. With snow falling and songs of Christmas in our heads, we were in nirvana. Out of the corner of my eye, I see a red and green glow. I turned and was amazed to see 3 light orbs doing what can only be described as playing tag. I grabbed my husband's arm, but he was already staring at the sight in awe. They danced and played for about 5 minutes and then disappeared. We have no idea what we saw, and my question is, what do you think? Andrea Hall, St. Paul, Minnesota. Well, Andrea, I'm not sure what to think. I have researched orbs, and your encounter is very similar to many I've heard. It would be very hard to explain what caused those, especially since it was snowing. I am of the opinion that orbs are creatures of some sort. Whether sentient or not, who can say? I have thoughts on both sides of that argument. I want to thank you for sharing your tale, and I surely do love orb stories. We all love a good story, but what we truly crave is a ghost story. It's time now for Ghost Stories with Sylvia. Sylvia Shults is a librarian and author by day, but at night, she becomes a ghost hunter. Following a lifetime spent in the pursuit of the weird and the strange, her non-fiction works include Ghost of the Illinois River, Fractured Spirits, 44 Years in Darkness, Hunting Demons, and The Spirits of Christmas. We now cross over the veil and join Sylvia as she tells us more tales from the unknown. Are you there, Sylvia?
I'm here. Come on in, Ron.
Well, Sylvia, I see you're still sporting the Halloween look around here. Or is that a year-round thing for you?
Oh, Halloween lasts a long time in this house.
Well, how have you been? What's new in the world of Sylvia Shults?
Oh, man. I just came back from visiting the Watsika house in Watsika, Illinois, and did an investigation there. And we did a bit of Victorian table tipping.
Okay, you're going to have to tell us what that is. Because I'm stopping the podcast right here. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm stopping the podcast right here. Sylvia, explain yourself. I've heard of cow tipping.
Well, table tipping was one of the tools that the Victorians used to use at their seances. And the Watsika house, I'll let people look that up because it's a complicated story. But this house was the site of many seances in the Victorian age. And table tipping is where 4 people or so sit around a very small table, like an end table, and they put their fingertips on the table, nothing more. And they ask questions of the spirits. The energy of the spirits comes through the table, and sometimes the table actually knocks right over, which is why it's called table tipping. We did not experience that, but we were able to feel that spirit energy coming through the table so strong that we could all feel the table vibrating underneath our fingertips, and people watching us could see the table move.
No way.
It was amazing. Oh, yes. Yes, way. It was so cool. It was like Christmas.
Okay. Now you realize that as soon as I see a table tipping, I'm tipping out of there. I'm gone. I am not staying in a house where the table just starts moving on its own. I'm not doing it. That's just me.
It was grand.
How do you get yourself into these things?
I go out and look for these things.
That's true. You kind of ask for it, don't you?
Yeah.
Well, Sylvia, I got some exciting news.
What's that?
We got an email.
Oh, wonderful.
Now, here's the cool part. I had a doctor's appointment today, and I've been in a rush. This whole day has been a rush, and I even had to write you and tell you that I might not be on time for the podcast today.
Right.
And I get home, I start setting up, and I let you know that, hey, I made it home in time. Everything's great. And then I see an email for you.
Dun, dun, dun.
And so how perfect is the timing on something like that? Can you plan that?
Just right before the podcast starts. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So tell me about this marvelous email.
Okay, well, let me read you the email. But before I do that, I'd like to tell you about who sent it.
Okay.
Are you up for that? And then we'll read this email.
Yeah, always interested in hearing who it is that's sending us these emails, because we love to get them.
Okay, well, let me just tell you his name. His name is Graham Gregor. And where do you think Mr. Gregor is from? Just take a wild guess. Graham Gregor. Doesn't that sound like something out of Scotland?
It does, yeah. Somewhere in New England?
My name is Graham McGregor. And no, that's my bad Scottish accent. But guess where? He's not actually from anywhere that you would imagine. He resides in the town of Cut and Shoot, Texas.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
Now, I am a believer in many things, but a town called Cut and Shoot, Texas, that really stretches my boundaries. So I had to look it up.
Of course. Your interest was piqued.
And so I went to see if there really is a town of Cut and Shoot, Texas. And by golly, by George, there is. Even when you go there, there's a story that tells you how it got its name. Now, I bet you want me to tell you how Cut and Shoot, Texas.
I would love to hear it.
Yeah, how Cut and Shoot, Texas got its name. You ready?
How did Cut and Shoot, Texas get its name?
You sound ready. Here we go. Cut and Shoot supposedly got its name from a fight that almost erupted in the small town in 1912 between the townsfolk who defended a preacher who wanted to hold a meeting in the town's community house and others who didn't like the saloon and gambling rumors that surrounded the preacher. The fight became so heated that a young boy was reported to have said, "I'm scared. I'm going to cut around the corner and shoot through the bushes in about a minute. In a weird twist of fate, it inspired the town's name. How about that? And this is right off of their homepage. This is their story.
Well, when you've got an origin story like that, you've got to share it with the world. That's delightful.
So, Graham, thank you not only for your email, but inadvertently giving us this story about how your hometown was named. Now, from what I read, it's about 1,000 to 2,000 people that live in this town. So not a big town by any stretch of the imagination. And it's about a 45-minute drive north of Houston. That's where this town resides. So what do you think of that?
That sounds ideal.
Okay.
When do we leave?
All right. Well, do you want to hear Graham Greger's email, or should we just not read it?
Oh, I think we ought to read it. Yeah.
All right. Here it is. Hello, Ron. First, let me say how much I love the show. I just started listening after a friend told me about it. I love your format, and I find myself looking forward to the Ghost Stories segment. I heard Sylvia talk about dowsing rods in passing, and I've seen them in other ghost hunting shows. How do they work, and why do they work? My internet search was limited to finding water and oil. Is that something you can answer, Sylvia? You want to take a shot at it?
Oh, sure. Let's give it a go. Graham, thank you for your question. That is a really good one. And dowsing rods are mostly used for finding water and oil. That's their primary function. So I'm not surprised that that's what the internet had. But paranormal enthusiasts use dowsing rods as well. And it's much the same as looking for water or oil. What we're doing is we're seeking energy. That's why we bring dowsing rods along on an investigation. We'll sit there. I've used them to very good effect on several investigations. We sit there with the dowsing rods, holding the short end in our hand and having the long ends out in front of us. They're an L shape, and we hold the short end of the L and let the long end swing free. And then we tell the spirits what we want. We say, could you cross the rods for a yes answer, and then swing them apart for a no answer. And you are kind of limited to yes and no questions when you do that. But that's an easy way. The rods are very light, and it's an easy way for a spirit to physically manipulate their surroundings to communicate with you. That's how they work. I'm not exactly sure why they work, if it's the ghosts grabbing them and crossing them or pushing them apart. That's what we like to think. But that's the theory of it, is we ask the spirits to use their energy to communicate with us using the dowsing rods by either crossing them for a yes answer or swinging them apart for a no answer.
Well, as with the city name, I had to do some research on my own on dowsing rods, and I found a story where a person was using them in their hands, just moving around or trying to find energy, just like what you said, and the thing just started spinning wildly in their hand. Have you ever seen anything like that? And they weren't doing it. It was just spinning.
Wow. I have never seen that. I would think that for a dowsing rod to just spin wildly, you would have to be holding it out at arm's length. When we sit there and hold them and we ask for the rods to swing out, I've seen it touch people's upper arms as they go out for a negative response. I've seen it go that far, but for the rods actually to swing, it would have to be held at arm's length. And I could see that happening. I could see that much energy going through the rods that it would spin, but I've never seen that myself. I've never witnessed that myself, but I have seen them react quite strongly. I've used them when they've reacted quite strongly, and you can feel them twitch in your hand as they cross, and you're just holding them just as lightly as you possibly can. And when you ask a question and the rods just swing crossed, it's really quite amazing.
Well, this same person, by the way, I found her name. Her name is Fiona Broom. She said that she also places a coin on the floor and asks the spirits to point the rod at the coin. Now, it doesn't say why she would do that. Can you think of any reason why? She says, I tell the rods to lead me to the coin. I do this aloud, saying something like, where's the coin? Point to it and lead me there.
Well, that's just the same as asking them to cross for a yes answer or swing apart for a no answer. I think that would be a very good way to calibrate the rods and make sure that it's a spirit doing what you're asking it to do. If you give the spirit a direction using the rods and ask them to actually do something with it, then I think it's much more of a positive, concrete thing for them to do instead of just manipulating the rods for yes and no. It gives them a goal. And if they actually do that, if they lead you to the coin, if they make the rod point at the coin, that is their signal to you that yes, they're listening, yes, they're intelligent. And yes, they can recognize the fact that you're asking them to point the rod at a coin. That's my take on it. And that's really good. I'm going to steal that. I'm going to use that on my next investigation.
Well, she goes on to say that she uses the rods to detect underground water pipes, electrical wiring, and so forth in business to help her define these things. And also, she thinks that using an EMF meter with ghosts is a stupid thing. It doesn't really tell you anything, and that the dowsing rod tells you everything because you yourself know that you're feeling this, you're watching this, you know in your heart whether you're moving those on your own or not. And she seems to think that she'd rather have a pair of dowsing rods than an EMF meter. What do you think about that?
That is a perfectly valid opinion, absolutely, because EMF meters can pick up other sources of electricity. They can pick up something in the wall. They can pick up a refrigerator running. They can pick up, they'll react to cell phones if they're not properly turned off, if they're not in airplane mode. So yeah, that's a very valid opinion. I think there's some worth to that.
And she in fact, she says that this is the main tool in her ghost hunting equipment.
That's cool. That's cool. And she's absolutely right. I mean, you know for yourself how tight or how loosely you are holding those rods. And if you're not a fraud or anything, if you are a serious investigator, you know that you are holding those rods just as steadily as you can and waiting for something else to move it and not moving it on your own. So yeah, I would trust that.
She has a picture of a set. They're much shorter than I thought they would be. If you're interested in this article, it's called Ghost 101, and the question is, how do people use dowsing rods in ghost hunting?
Right on.
And it's written by Fiona Broom. And that's interesting. So, Sylvia, if you had a choice between a dowsing rod and an EMF meter, which would you pick?
Oh, having used both, I think I'm going to agree with Fiona and go ahead and just pick the dowsing rods.
You know, that doesn't surprise me because of what you said with using crystals to protect yourself. It just seems more like something that you would want to do. So yeah. I'm not surprised. Well, Sylvia, do we have any stories today? After all, this is Ghost Stories with Sylvia, not Dowsing with Sylvia.
We do have some ghost stories, and I like to call these stories Psych-Out. Now, Ron, you know that, and we investigators we go out and we look for spirits and we look for proof of life after death, but it's very important to have enough confidence in yourself to debunk things. If something happens that you can't explain and you think it might be paranormal, it's always a really good idea to see if you can explain it away naturally. Because if you can't, then what you're left with is something that might actually be paranormal. But there are so many things that can be debunked.
So what's your standard for debunking?
Well, you look around. If you hear a strange noise, you look around for what might have caused that. If you see a reflection in a picture, if you see a smear of light, make sure that there aren't any bugs around. Or if you see a mist in the photographs, make sure no one's vaping nearby or smoking, that the smoke might get into the picture. If you feel a cold breeze, make sure there's no draft. At the Watsika house, I was sitting on a bed talking with somebody who was sitting on a chair facing me, and behind me, the door to the closet opened. We heard the latch click open.
That's incredible.
And it had been latched. And that was the first thing we did was we opened the closet to see if maybe it was a bathroom door or something and someone had come in from another door and the air pressure had forced the door open. No, it was a closet. And no one was in the closet. So yeah, so that was, and there was a light playing around in the closet, and that turned out to be someone in the bathroom with a flashlight, and the light from the flashlight was coming in under the door. So that was debunked. The opening door was not debunked. So
you've got me curious then. So tell me a story that isn't what it seems.
Okay. So there is a spot in New England called the Bridgewater Triangle, and it's just loaded with all sorts of mysterious, wonderful things. There's ghosts, there's Bigfoot, there's UFOs, there's cryptids, there's all kinds of weird stuff. And one of the weird stories that have come out of the Bridgewater Triangle is this one. There's a very famous ghost at the Wareham Public Library. Now, this caught my attention because it's supposed to be the ghost of a librarian. And this woman apparently wanted peace and quiet near her collection. And she hated rock music. She thought it distracted her readers. So whenever people would drive past the library with radios that were turned up, this librarian would run out of the building and chase down cars that were playing rock music and make them change it to a classical station. And she thought that was more restful and soothing for reading. And the story goes that even after her death, she's still doing this because if you drive past the library and your radio is tuned to a rock station and it's too loud, that ghost will turn it to a classical station.
Really?
Sounds pretty cool, right? Yeah. Now, we don't know this librarian's name, and that's because she never actually existed. The story of this librarian was made up to explain something that happens next to the library. The library happens to be in a spot in town where the radio reception is a bit wonky. So if you're driving past and your car station is on a rock station, it'll just flip back and forth between the rock and the classical station. So the two broadcast signals of two different radio stations converge right at that spot in town. So it's not a ghostly librarian changing your car radio. It's just the fact that it's just the radio stations, the broadcast signals are just a little mixed up. And especially if your car radio has weak reception, it'll just switch back and forth as you drive down the street.
That story reminds me of something I learned quite recently.
Oh?
I'm sure you've seen the movie Ghostbusters.
Oh, yeah.
The scene there with that librarian. Okay, but now, before you laugh, did you know that Dan Aykroyd is a firm believer in ghost hunting and doing the whole research thing? And I think it was his father, Samuel Augustus Aykroyd, who is also a famous paranormalist.
Yes, I did know that. I know they're both very interested in the paranormal.
Right, but did you know that librarian is based on an actual event, an actual story that I don't know if Dan Aykroyd experienced in himself or heard it or what, but that was actually based on real stuff.
Whoa! With card catalog cards being ripped out of the drawers like that?
I don't know about that, but an apparition of a librarian for sure. And it was something that Samuel Aykroyd had either experienced or heard the story. Again, it's all hearsay because I'm just going on what I saw, but that's supposedly very true.
Oh, that's marvelous.
Anyway, by mentioning the librarian, that brought that back to me. Now, do you have a second story for us? I think you do.
I most certainly do. Now, this story comes from the book Weird Massachusetts, and the title is A Night in the Funeral Parlor. there was a fellow working on the Springfield police force, Springfield, Massachusetts, and the police station got a call, came in from a little old lady who lived above a local funeral parlor. And she was convinced that there was something weird going on because she knew the funeral home was empty at that time of night, but she kept hearing strange noises. So the policeman told her, lock your door and we'll be out to check it out. So this policeman entered the first floor and started looking around. There were a few lights on that had just been left on. So the place was lit with a very strange, eerie glow. There were actually 2 caskets there ready for the viewings the next day. So there were 2 corpses at the funeral parlor waiting their turn for their visitations the next day. And the policeman said, in that spooky low light, these people did not look very peaceful. They looked very harsh. I mean, dead bodies look harsh. And he said, maybe I was imagining it, but yeah, you try walking around a funeral parlor at night with 2 dead people there, not knowing what you're going to find. He said, you'd be creeped out too.
Not me. No way. Not going to happen.
No. I don't mind spooks, but no, I do not like being around dead people. No, not at all.
In fact, Sylvia, let me take that a step further and wonder at the sanity of someone living above a funeral parlor. That's not going to be my first choice.
All the time. Oh, ugh.
I couldn't handle that. I would not be able to handle that.
No, knowing that they're right underneath you. Ugh. Anyway, but the policeman could tell that these dead people were not making the noise. Suddenly, as he was investigating, he heard a crash from the basement, and that's where the embalming was done. And this policeman drew his gun, and he's a public servant. He has to go check this out. It's his job. So he draws his weapon, and he heads down the stairs to the basement. And he got to the basement, and he got to the place where they prepared the bodies. The caskets were displayed down there, too. All of the caskets were open to show the interiors and the satin lining and everything, except for 2 of them. 2 of them were closed. And the policeman said he lifted his weapon and really hoped and prayed that whatever was in those caskets wasn't immune to bullets. He said, I got 6 shots here, and I'm shooting 3 of them into those closed coffins. If anyone is in there, you better come out before I shoot. And with that, 2 guys jumped out of the caskets yelling, don't shoot, don't shoot, don't shoot. And he said they were so pale with fright that they looked dead themselves. And it turns out that these 2 fellows had broken into the funeral home, and they were trying to steal the formaldehyde used in the embalming process to make crack cocaine. And in Springfield at the time, that was a big problem. They were having a big problem with drugs, especially crack cocaine. So the policeman busted these guys in the act of trying to steal formaldehyde, and they were arrested and prosecuted. And the policeman said that when he got everything sorted down there, came back upstairs, and he had to pass through the viewing rooms again, and he couldn't help it. He looked over at those 2 bodies that were lying there in their caskets, and he said it seemed to him that those 2 bodies, their expressions were a little more peaceful and benign. Oh. And he said that the threatening presence he felt before was gone. So completely subjective, but that's the experience he had.
Agreed. It is subjective, but.
Yeah, but.
But. That's all I got. I do know that what a horrible drug crack cocaine is. It makes people do some pretty dumb things. I don't understand why you would poison yourself to that level.
Yeah, and apparently I don't know the difference between regular cocaine and crack cocaine because I'm not that kind of person. I'm not very well versed on my drug terms, whatever. But I've heard that if you do cocaine and there is some genetic component in your body that can't process it, you'll have a heart attack immediately and die the first time you have it.
And that, if that's just cocaine, I don't know the difference either. I do know that it is just a soul drainer, literally a soul drainer. Crack cocaine is. I have seen before and after pictures. It's just amazing what this drug does to people, but yet they do it anyway. I don't understand, but I guess it's not for me to understand.
Well,
but let's move on to another story.
Let's do.
This is not the crack cocaine podcast.
Thank goodness for that. I doubt very much that I would be involved in it if it was the crack cocaine podcast. Let's stick with ghosts.
All right. Yeah. So Ghost Stories with Sylvia. What's our third story?
Okay. So the third story comes to us from way back in 1898. There were two young ghost hunters, two girls, that set out to discover the ghost of Boggs Ravine. There had been talk of a mysterious haunting on the outskirts of a town called Rathbone in New York. There was a hut that was said to be haunted by a spirit, a very crazed, spooky spirit. There has been a murder in the hut about a year before. Floyd Myers had murdered Leonard Hart in a quarrel. So the hut was abandoned, and it had been taken over by a gambling den. They made it their headquarters. So this hut was shunned. It was like taboo territory on account of both the murder and the fact that it had been turned into a gambling den and criminals were said to be living there. However, in 1898, this particular house became known for the appearance of a ghostly woman who regularly manifested herself to visitors. So what happened was...
I'm waiting for the twist.
Okay. So one of the people that told this story was a fellow named Drummer from New York, and he claimed that he fell into the hands of these gamblers who drugged him and robbed him and stowed him away in a loft and left him there. And this was printed in the newspapers, but people figured that, well, he was just trying to cover his tracks. Like, oh, no, they beat me up. No, he was actually there just to partake of the gambling himself. Mm-hmm. So just after daybreak, this fellow Drummer was awakened by this curious sensation of fright. And he looked around himself. He was kind of groggy, so he looked around, and then he heard this scream of agony that just froze the blood in his veins. Suddenly, he heard somebody creeping below. He was up in the loft. He said he'd been tied up, and he heard somebody creeping around. And he thought he was having a nightmare. He thought he was still unconscious until another piercing scream rang out, and he then heard an icy voice say, "For God's sake, Floyd, you have killed me!" And he realized that the voice was that of a woman. He thought that was very strange. And he went down. He said he was going to help her, but he stumbled down the stairs, and all he saw was somebody garbed in a black dress, and that the apparition just vanished through the doorway. And he went outside to try and find this apparition, but he couldn't find anyone. So that got people talking. That actually appeared in the newspapers, and people had known the hut was haunted for about a year. Word started getting around. There were a couple of young girls, Marie Pelfer and Catherine Phillips, and they decided that they were going to go out ghost hunting. Now, these two girls were amateur photographers, so they thought, let's try to get a picture of this apparition. So they went to the cabin, they loaded up their pan with flash powder, and they set up their camera in the direction they thought the ghost was going to come through. They set it up facing the door, and they sat down to wait. And they waited for hours. They got there about 8 o'clock, and it wasn't until midnight that something actually started to happen. Around midnight, they heard the creaking of the rusty hinges of this hut door, and slowly the door swung open, and a woman dressed in black stood there in the doorway. And Marie Pelfer struck a match and dropped it into the pan of flash powder, and they took the picture, and the flash lit up every nook and cranny of the hut. And the other girl, Catherine Phillips, snapped the picture, and the ghost stood for a moment just frozen there in the flash of the light, and then shrieked and fled out into the darkness. And the ghost hunters were absolutely amazed. They'd captured the likeness of a ghost on the camera, and they said, let's take this home and let's develop it and see what we've got. So they spent, this is 1898, so photography's still in its infancy. You don't have, point and shoot cameras. You don't have a Polaroid. It takes more than a little bit to get this developed. But they spent the next day developing the plate. And when they finished developing the picture, they were rather astounded to recognize the person in the picture. They found the frightened face of Maggie Carlson. She was a friend of theirs. She had married a woodman named Fraser. So the girls, Catherine and Marie, went to Mrs. Fraser's house and said, hey, we know you're the ghost. What's going on? When confronted with this photographic evidence, she admitted that she was indeed the ghost of Boggs Ravine. Her explanation was that after her marriage, she discovered that her husband was a regular visitor to this gambler's hut. And she decided to take things into her own hands, and she discovered this novel way of frightening the paste out of him and the other gamblers. And that's how she figured she was going to keep her husband away from the gambling den.
What a great story.
These two young girls were a real-life Daphne and Velma in 1898.
I love that story. What a great story.
Thank you.
It did bring up a question, though, in my mind.
What's that?
When you were talking about ghost hunters in 1890s, what's the oldest record that you've seen of a ghost hunter doing their job?
Let me see. If I remember correctly, the first EVP was captured, and I know I know people are gonna listen to this and write into you and send us emails telling me that I'm wrong. But if I remember correctly, the first EVP was captured in about 1863. And yeah, there was a Swedish fellow who was recording bird song outside, and he captured the voice of his late father. And so that was pretty interesting. And then he started actually going out and recording and trying to get EVPs on purpose. And then, of course, in the 1860s, you've got the rise of spiritualism and the rise of spirit photography. There was
I've heard of that.
Yeah,
Very big thing.
Yeah, a fellow named Mumler in New York. And I'm just dragging this out of my own brain, but there's a photographer named Mumler, and he was working in a studio. He took a picture of a chair. He was either testing out his camera, or he had to take a picture of this chair for some reason to put it in a catalog or something. I don't know. I don't remember the story about that. But he caught a figure on camera on the plate that looked like the spirit of his young cousin who had died of tuberculosis, I think. So he continued to make these photographs, and he actually went into business. He had that as a sideline to his photography business and offered spirit photography. He said, come in and we'll try to contact your loved one, and I will try to take a picture of your loved one with you in the studio. And there was a woman who came in dressed in black with a black veil over her face, and she gave him her name. It was an alias, and she asked for a sitting, and she refused to take her veil off until the camera was ready to take the picture. So she sat there, and Mumler said, okay, I'm ready to take the picture now. And she lifted her veil, and Mumler snapped the photograph. And what he realized later was that this woman was Mary Lincoln. And the spirit that he photographed leaning over her was Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, I know that you can go online and look at some of those old spirit photography photos from the early 1800s. It's not early 1800s, but late 1800s.
Right, yeah. Starting at about 1860, yeah.
Pretty creepy stuff. And,
it is, yeah.
In fact, I'm looking at that photo you just described. Right now on the internet.
Okay.
It's right here.
What was the alias she gave?
I don't know. I'm looking at the picture. Let's see.
Okay.
Mary Todd Lincoln, and with her ghost husband, Abraham Lincoln. Mary Todd Lincoln. But it's a weird-looking photo.
Yeah.
There's no way you could fake that in that day and age. They didn't have Photoshop.
Exactly. I mean, some of them look like they might be a double exposure. Some of them look pretty fake. But others, like that one, she gave an alias. He didn't know who she was until he took the picture. So how could he arrange for that to be faked?
No, he couldn't, since she didn't know who he was. But it's just, I'm looking at the picture, and it's just very odd.
Yeah.
It's very, very odd. And she is dressed just like you described, except there's no veil. You can see her face.
Well, yeah. She took it off for the picture.
Right. Amazing stuff. I highly recommend, if you've never done a search, and look at some of these creepy pictures. They are downright amazing. Some of them, like you said, you can see they were somehow fake.
Yeah.
But for the most part, some of them are truly incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So
search for spirit photography, not the postmortem photography. There's a big difference.
That's what I searched for, was spirit photography, and that picture you described came right up.
That's really famous. Yeah.
It was Mary Todd Lincoln.
Yeah.
I highly recommend taking a look at these. They're very creepy.
Yeah.
All right, Sylvia. Well, enough about that. You got to tell us what's going on with Lights Out, your podcast, and what's going on with the blog.
Well,
what you got going?
I have a lot going on. In the next episode of Lights Out, we are going to visit the very haunted Zion Cemetery, which is very close to me, actually. It's out in the country, and I will take you there, and I will tell you stories of this haunted cemetery. And on the blog, I just recently posted something very, very fun, which is inadvertently humorous cemetery art. I went to...
Oh, yes, I saw that.
I went to Mount Carmel Cemetery up by Chicago in Hillside, and it's where Al Capone is buried, and it's got lots of lovely cemetery art. And one of them just struck me as humorous, and I really hope I'm not going to hell for it, but I laughed at this, and I hope other people will too. And I just found it amusing, and I put it on my blog so people can go and look at that.
I recommend that you guys go over there and take a look, because it is quite humorous. So take a peek. And for the record, what is that blog name?
It is sylviashults.wordpress.com, and the Schultz is spelled Schults.
Isn't that something? Well, Sylvia, I think we've run out of things to talk about.
Oh, until next time.
I want to encourage you guys. We love starting these shows with emails. I know I do. And Sylvia has told me that she absolutely adores it. So I say, if you have a question for me or Sylvia, let us know, because we'll do the best we can to answer it. Today's question I thought it was interesting. So again, I want to thank you, Graham Greger from Cut and Shoot, Texas.
Thank you, Graham, for the email. That was interesting, and it led us down a little interesting rabbit hole, too.
Always does. Yeah, that's why I stopped saying, I tell the listeners here, I told Sylvia originally that I wanted to keep these at 20 minutes.
It's a losing battle.
Not going to happen. I don't even want to know how long we've talked this time. I'll make it work. Anyway, Sylvia, thank you so much again for coming. And thank you, Graham, for the note. And thank you, the town of Cut and Shoot, Texas.
And thank you guys all for listening. We really appreciate it, and we love sharing stories with you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Ghost Stories with Sylvia was brought to you by Gladys Goodies. Great treats for your dog to eat. I always have a great time talking with Sylvia, and I learn all kinds of new stuff. Like this week, dowsing rods. Who knew? If you want to visit her on her own turf, head to sylviashults.wordpress.com. There you will find her blog and access to Lights Out. Thank you, Sylvia. And now, take it away, Jason.
Hi everyone, I am Jason Dowd, president of Gladys Goodies, and Gladys is my dachshund, and I am excited to tell you that if you go to our website, GladysGoodies.com, and use the promo code RONS, that's RONS, you will get 25% off your entire order. These treats are all natural with low fat, no artificial flavors, chemicals, byproducts, preservatives, sodium, or anything else that will harm your fur friend. We take great pride in our products, and you will see it once you try some. So go to GladysGoodies.com, that's GladysGoodies.com, and don't forget to use the promo code RON to get that discount. And while you're there, pick your doggy up some swag too. You'll be glad you did, and thanks for listening to this amazing podcast of Ron's Amazing Stories.
Podcast 411, done. I want to thank this time Zachary Bird, Andrea Hall, and Sylvia Shults for taking part. Many blessings upon you. If you want to follow the podcast or the blog, just head to ronsamazingstories.com. There you will find an amazing number of links that should fit every need. Now, do you want to help the show? The best thing you can do is to tell your friends all about it, and please leave reviews or feedback wherever you listen. This is what makes podcasts grow. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.